jQuery has a lot of neat animation effects that are not particularly hard to use, and we'll run through some of them. Hide, show, and toggle can be used with any HTML content, and the way you set this up is you have whatever your selector is that you're targeting, and if you're going to use hide, which we've already used, .hide, and for the animation effect, you actually can give it a speed in the parentheses, and you can also include a function that will run after the animation is done. So hide obviously hides whatever the HTML is from display. Show will display it again, and toggle takes you between hide and show. And this little example basically is targeting paragraphs, and it's going to kind of slowly hide them. The time is in milliseconds, and then this will slowly show them. And I've got buttons kind of associated with each one. So this is my listener, and then this would be my handler here as far as the event goes. So I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And you can kind of see how it slowly hides. And now I'm going to click on show. And it slowly shows. And obviously, the higher the number of milliseconds, the slower the slower it's going to hide and show. The toggle can be used to go back and forth. So if you click on this, right now it's hidden, so you click it again and it shows. Fade is kind of neat because it basically lets you fade out an element, so it goes from visible to invisible. It allows you to fade in an element, so it goes from invisible to fully visible. And you can also do what's called fade toggle, where you go back and forth. And this one also has a speed parameter, so you can indicate if you want it to fade in, fade out, or toggle fast or slow. You can use milliseconds, and you can also use keywords of slow or fast. And again, you can execute a function as a callback so that after the animation plays, the function will run. And so all this is I've got three different divs. And what I've done is I've used different speeds, so you can see what the difference is in just fade in without any parameters, using fade in with slow, and then using fade in with 3000 milliseconds. And I basically did the same thing for fade out and toggle. And so right now you cannot see that I actually have some boxes that I've created, and they were created with divs. So the width is 140 pixels, the height's 100 pixels. Okay, so right now you can't see them, but if I click to fade them in, okay, you can see what they look like. Now I'm going to fade them out. And keep in mind that the first one has no setting, the middle one is slow, and the last one is got a higher millisecond. So let's click on that, just so you can see the difference here again. So no speed setting and slow are fairly similar. So the most control is actually setting the number of milliseconds. And fade in, fade out, fade toggle do go from fully transparent to solid. If you want partial transparencies, then you're going to use fade to. So fade to has an additional parameter. So not only do you have the speed and a callback function, but you also can specify opacity, and that is a number between 0 and 1. So 0 is transparent, 1 is solid. And so in this little example, I'm still using for speed, 0 slow and 3000 milliseconds. And you can see that I've changed the opacity. So I've got 0.15, 0.4, and 0.7. So let's partially fade in these boxes so you can just see what they look like. Okay, so that is using the fade to. The jQuery slide effects are actually pretty cool. We are going to be using those in a couple weeks when we get into using the jQuery user interface because they work real well for menus and that kind of thing. And so what this little example is showing you is how to use the slide effects. And it's using slide toggle, which basically does a slide up and a slide down. And I've got the script showing. I've got some of the CSS here showing so you can kind of get a feel for what it's doing. I've got an ID that I've labeled flip, and I have an ID called panel. And let us take a look at this. So click to display or hide. So if I click, that's what the slide looks like. And then if I click again, it hides it. Okay, so that was slide toggle set to slow. And it was targeting panel. And you can see that all of the panel content was generated when we clicked on that flip, which was the line that said click to display. It did the slide toggle and generated all of that content. So animation effects. Basically, you can animate any of the CSS from the location to the opacity. And a lot of animation just involves modifying, the top or the left properties. So to use the animation method, you obviously have to use a selector because it identifies what you're targeting, .animate. And then in parentheses, you're going to give it your parameters, the speed, and if you want a function to execute after, you will give it a callback function. And for speed, you can use milliseconds or slow and fast, just like you could with the other animation effects. And parameters would be what it is that you want to animate. So if you want to animate the location, you will be giving it your CSS location property and value. If you want to manipulate opacity, you'd be giving it the CSS opacity property and value. So this little example, when we click a button, the div is going to animate, and it's basically going to change location. So it's going to start at the top, and the left is going to be 600. Then it's going to go down to 400 and put the left at 0. So let's see what that looks like. So here's where it's starting. Let me click on start. We said it went to 0, over to 600, down to 400, back to 0. So let's do that again. This is where it's rendered. And then we do the animation where we said to do the top to 0, left 600, top 400, left 0. Okay, and you can see that's exactly what it did. This one is modifying several things. So this just had one CSS parameter. This next example has several. So we're still using the animate method. We're going to be doing a top set to 0. We're going to make it more transparent, and we're adjusting height and width. Okay, then it's still going to move over, so it's going to go up to the top. It's still going to move over 600 pixels, and it's going to be more solid, but it's going to be smaller. Then we go down to 400, and it becomes more transparent, goes back to that size of 200 height and width, and then we move it back to 0, where it's totally solid and much smaller. So let's take a look at this one. So here's where it starts, and you can see it gets bigger. We'll do that again. It gets bigger, more transparent, more solid, more transparent, totally solid. So this one is probably a little bit more fun. We're animating some text. You'll see I've got an ID called shrink and another one called grow. So when we click, it's going to execute this anonymous function where we're targeting our H1 element and we're animating it, and we're either increasing or decreasing the font size. And so you'll see this, the elements, if you're going to target them using animate, it's very similar to what we had to do in JavaScript when we use document.body.style. Okay, so if it's a 2-word CSS property, you use camel casing and you take away the dash. So if I click on shrink text, it's going to run through here. It's going to take 10 pixels away. And if I click on grow text, it's going to run through here and add 10 pixels. So let's shrink it and let's grow it a couple. And we'll shrink it. And so you get the idea. What toggle text is going to do is it's going to toggle the font size. So let's see what that looks like. So it disappears and then it goes back to its original size. Okay, so that is what toggle is doing. So there is a stop animation method that will stop the animation before it is finished. It works for all jQuery effect functions, so sliding, fading, custom animations, basically works for all of them. And the default, if you use .stop, is for everything to be stopped. Go to end specifies that the current animation should finish. So if you have a series of animation set up, maybe you've got them chained together, it's going to finish off the first one. So I do have an example so you can kind of see how that looks. So we're animating hello, just so you know. The start button starts the animation. Stop is going to stop the current animation. But if something is queued up, it's going to let it finish. Stop all, it stops it dead in its track. And stop but finish rushes through the current active animation and then it stops. So let's take a look at our code too here. Okay, so you can see I've got the script code up top. Let me pull this off. Because I think it is kind of helpful, hopefully sometimes, to see things display side by side. Oh. Okay, so you can see we've got a start ID here, and that starts our animation. And you can see that the animation involves moving it across and increasing the size. And then we have stop. And then we have stop all, which doesn't even let it finish the current animation, whereas stop does. And then we have another stop with two true parameters. And that basically lets it finish the current animation, but it makes it do it faster. So let's hit start. And we'll do stop. And you can see that it's finishing. So let me reload. We'll hit start. And let's do stop but finish. And you can see it just kind of rushed to the end. And let's do start. And then let's do stop all. Okay, it stops it dead in its tracks. So that's the difference. And if you're doing a jQuery game, it is kind of important that you know the difference between these commands. And we talked a little bit about callback functions, but we really haven't looked at example that's using them. And this example, basically, if we're going to hide a paragraph, we don't want the alert to display until after the paragraph is hidden. Okay, so that, in this case, a callback function is appropriate because we want it to finish hiding the paragraph and then display the alert. Without the callback, what typically happens is the alert displays before the paragraph is hidden, and it looks kind of ridiculous. So the callback is applied to this button, but not to this one. So first we'll do it without the callback so you can see that it looks kind of silly because the paragraph really isn't hidden yet. And now we're going to do it with the callback. Okay, so that's an example of why you would use a callback. We looked at a previous example that had some command chaining. Okay, and we looked at how you chain CSS, but you can also chain animation, which kind of makes sense if you wanted to do like a bouncing ball or something. You definitely would want the animation to be chained. And so this just shows you basically how you would chain animation. And the only thing that you need to do is leave off the selector, and you do not put that semicolon in until after the very last command.